Thank you all for your patience. We're very excited to have you all with us tonight, which marks 1 year of doing these conversations. So thank you all for coming and being with us tonight. With that being said, we also recognize that today is September 11th, which is a historic and somber moment in our history. So we'd like to just take a moment for you to reflect, whatever you'd like to do to honor the lives lost and this special day. We'll just take a second. Thank you. And we'd like to welcome Mrs. Jennifer Saltzman with us this evening, who would like to open with a few words.
Hey, I think I'm on. I never know. Okay, cool. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me and always having me. And happy anniversary. It's pretty exciting. Just like to congratulate Amy and Sheila for the awesome, amazing hard work that you guys do every day to make this community better. Always there for a helping hand. And it is. You guys are what is shaping and forming the Guardian experience and making it a culture that is welcoming and always willing to be helpful and knowing that you're never alone and there's somebody there. So I just wanted to say thank you. I so appreciate your efforts, and it's just getting better and better. So thanks, and hi to everybody else out there. And again, Sheila, I appreciate the September 11th discussion too, because it's definitely a heavy day and one that definitely is for reflection and just thinking of all those lives lost and how the country was forever changed on that day. So thanks, and again, appreciate everybody, and I'll be done. Okay.
All right, ma'am, thank you so much for saying something and for being here. Your encouragement over the last year has meant so much to us. So thank you for trusting us with this community that we all love. It's strange to think that we've been doing this a year, but we're here because of all of you who are showing up month after month, supporting the effort. So this is about all of us tonight. It's about building the community, and we're just happy to have you with us. And I'm excited to see what the next year holds. So with that, we're going to introduce Colonel Casey Beard again for round 2 of learning about the Space Force. Sir, thank you for being here. Everybody loved you last time, that they wanted you to come back. So we appreciate that you're here, and I will let you take it from here.
Awesome. Amy, thank you so much, Sheila and the team. Thanks for having me again. The pressure's on for the encore, but it really is awesome to be with you. The spouses are really often and almost always the best audience and really the toughest. So that makes this extra exciting. Please fire away with questions. This is your time. This is our time. Not only to get to know each other a little bit better, but to know the service, why we exist, what our role is, and where we're going. I also want to thank you again, just for this effort writ large, as Candid Conversations. I really am grateful, very grateful for supporting your Guardian, the support that you give to your Guardian, our families, and really ultimately our service. The fact that you're here means that you care, and that you're passionate about what we do, what our mission is, why the Space Force exists. So I really appreciate you. And as we did the moment of silence earlier on with 9/11, it's just another reminder about why we serve and how important our freedom is, and preserving that freedom for our nation, allies, and partners. And so again, thank you for being a partner in that and supporting us and listening to me ramble a little bit in my excitement and passion for the Space Force mission. Like I said, great being back for the encore. Hopefully the second go around is as good as the first. I really enjoyed the company we had. I'm going to pick up a little bit where we left off. So if you missed the first engagement we had back in May, not to worry. I know Amy and the team has the slides, has the charts, and I'm even happy to go back and answer some of those questions if you were here last. because I do know it was a fire hose of information. So if you want to touch on any of that, feel free to. Again, this is your time. This second half is a little bit less structured than the first. So the first engagement we had, if you do recall, and for those that weren't there, was more focused on the space domain itself, how critical space capabilities are to our prosperity and security. The threat environment, we've tried to go through a series of examples of the threat to the highest, as close as we could without going into the classified level. And then ultimately, with all of that combined, why the Space Force exists to begin with, and what our role is in national security. So actually, the slide you see that now. Why the USSF, why the Space Force exists. What we ended on last time, and many of you are probably familiar with this. If you haven't seen it, it is the Space Force's mission, quite simply, with the criticality of space to national prosperity, security, and whatnot. And given the threat environment, we fundamentally exist to secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space. Oftentimes, you'll hear General Saltzman say that the fundamental reason why we even have a military service is to contest and control the domain that we are assigned. So if you think about it, with the small exception of the Marine Corps, the Department of Defense has chosen and elected to build services around domains: the air domain, the land domain, the maritime or sea domain, and of course the space domain. And just like the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy exist to secure their domains, that's why the Space Force exists. But I will do a quick refresher. If you Amy, if you can go to the next chart real quick, and I appreciate you just scrolling through this. I kind of mentioned again, space underpins the American way of life and supports all instruments of national power. In short, to summarize from the last discussion, we do not project or employ our instruments of power, economic, diplomatic, certainly military, or informational instruments of power, without space. And you see kind of the spectrum here on this chart of every facet of our lives. In fact, there's really no facet of our day-to-day lives that isn't affected or touched either directly or indirectly by space. You might be able to see there's agriculture, our farming community, our farmers are highly reliant on the signal provided by our GPS constellations to ensure timing and their timing for harvest and their equipment is effective and is successful, given the amount of people that actually need the food there. From banking, ATM, every ATM transaction you make is informed by the GPS signal. Our ability to transmit communications around the globe beyond line of sight, as we'll call it, are highly dependent on our satellite communications capabilities, all the way through our national defense and security. In fact, one of the things I won't dwell too much on this chart, but one of the things I'll leave you with from a national defense standpoint is that since 1991, our reliance on space for military operations has increased so much that the entire joint force, and what I mean by the joint force is the collection of all of the military services, the structure of it, our size, the equipment that we field, the training that we give, are all predicated, are all assuming that we will have space capabilities. Space capabilities allows our military services to be smaller, more expeditionary, more global, more reaching. And so if we were to lose access to space, and if the Army, Navy, Air Force, et cetera, were no longer to have that ability to employ space or use space capabilities, they actually would not be nearly as effective as they were, because they're designed with the assumption of space being there. That's how critical space is to our way of life and our way of warfare, and again, why the Space Force exists. So with that quick context in place, we can now start to talk a little bit more about, well, how are we structured? If we exist this way, and this is why we exist, how did we design ourselves? Why did we design ourselves? And what are the various functions that our guardians fulfill as they accomplish that mission? So if we can go to the next slide here and kind of go through that. I think many of you are familiar with this, if not all of you, but this is a good reminder. We have our mission that we talked about to secure our nation's interest in, from, and to space. The core values, those values that we hold each guardian to in our daily interactions in our daily lives. are summarized in these four words, 4 C's. Our character, you can equate that to the integrity that we have, how we uphold ourselves, and how we interact with one another. In the same vein, the connections that we make, how important it is to build these connections, i.e., via candid conversations, to know one another, to support one another, to be able to hone one another's skills as guardians, as iron sharpens iron, to ensure that we're ready to accomplish our mission. The commitment necessary, the dedication necessary to be able to achieve this very somber and solemn mission that we've been given. And finally, the courage. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take decisive action. It's going to take confidence in the face of ambiguity to move out and move forward. And that's what we expect in our guardians. That's what you can expect in a guardian as you come across them. And then lastly, just to put it in context, both physically and metaphorically speaking, our motto is Semper Supra, always above, always ready to excel, always ready to defend. So now we'll go into the next chart here. That's a good refresher for all of us to kind of break down the core function, the core mission. And this is where I would hope in the next several minutes that you can start seeing your guardian, your guardians that you support, and where they start fitting into the larger puzzle of our mission and organization. So again, our mission really starts to unveil the core functions that the Space Force upholds and executes to secure our nation's interests in, from, and to space. So when we talk about securing our nation's interests in space, that really is the fundamental mission of space superiority. As I mentioned earlier, controlling the domain, making sure that we have freedom of action, that we can operate as we want to freely without what we would say prohibitive interference, and to potentially, and if necessary, deny an adversary from using space to target us, to track us, to engage our forces in our country. And that's the fundamental idea of securing our nation's interest in space. The missions that are associated with the Space Force that your guardians fulfill every day are such as examples are orbital warfare, our Delta 9 units, and supporting organizations in SPOC, STARCOM, and Space Systems Command, which we'll talk about. Electromagnetic warfare, EW, our Delta 3 team, executing those operations. Space battle management across the board. You have Delta 15, Delta 5, and even at the lower levels, lower echelons in the units themselves, working battle management. But we also secure our nation's interests from space. So once we secure it, once we ensure that the domain is safe and secure and we can operate freely, we have to be able to leverage or exploit the domain to be able to provide those capabilities to the rest of the joint force, i.e. to the other military services in the other domains. This is exploitation. Those missions, missile warning, Delta 4 in SPOC up at Buckley fulfills that mission. Satellite communications, our Delta 8 team around the globe. PNT, that's position, navigation, and timing. That's the GPS signal out of also our mission Delta 31, the TUSOPS organization. And then lastly, to secure our nation's interest to space. So we can't control the domain, and we certainly cannot exploit the domain if we can't access the domain. And that takes us all the way to the beginning of this. This is our ability to deploy, as it says on the chart, sustain equipment in space, to get that equipment into the domain for use and employment. Those fundamental missions are space launch out of our 2 space ranges. One is at Cape Canaveral, out of Space Launch Delta 45 in Florida, and the other is at Vandenberg Space Force Base, Space Launch Delta 30, out on the West Coast. So launch, the range control, we have ranges that we call that make sure that those rockets are safe as they go through the trajectory into orbit, and that all those underneath its trajectory are secure. Satellite control network, the SCN, dispersed around the globe to ensure that we can control our satellites, uplink and downlink, what we would call telemetry. Consider that a virtual tether to make sure that we can access and speak to and receive information from our satellites. That satellite control network is executed by Space Delta 6 at a Shriever. Underlying all of those supporting all of those missions are what we would call enabling functions. Intelligence support, your guardians that are doing intelligence. Defensive cyber operations, our cyber guardians. And the overall command and control, the ability to task and direct forces in a cohesive way to ensure they're operating as a team. All of those functions are critical and are also executed by our guardians. So I think if we get into the next slides, we can start getting into what your guardians do, and then after that, how they're organized to do it. So kind of a summary of all of those, the basic space power disciplines, every one of our guardians, whether they're officer or enlisted, can be bend or categorized, if you will, their specialties in these 7 disciplines. One, as I already mentioned, is orbital warfare. That's largely involved with space superiority operations. Space battle management, ensuring that our guardians at the tactical edge have the direction and information that they need to be able to execute their missions day to day. Electromagnetic warfare, that's if you consider the electromagnetic spectrum, and I won't get too technical there, but jamming radio frequency signals and whatnot to be able to gain space superiority. Shifting gears slightly, engineering and acquisition. So we have to be able, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, we have to be able to acquire, to procure our capabilities, our satellites, our weapon systems, and that acquisition process, the design of our force and the acquisition of those capabilities has to be relevant. It has to be threat informed, and it has to be easily operated by our operational community. And so our engineers and our acquirers are critical in giving us the relevant capabilities that will keep us ahead of the threat. Space access and sustainment, I've already talked about that with launch. Many of those guardians assigned to Patrick and Vandenberg help us in that regard. Military intelligence, critical to everything that we do, and of course, cyber operations. So I keep alluding to the structure. I do believe that's my next chart. And again, I encourage you to ask questions. Stop me at any time. If something doesn't make sense, if something doesn't check, or if you just got a burning question related to this or anything. But here's our broad organization that we have to be able to accomplish the missions that we've been given, the tasks that we've been given. Here's how we're basically structured. We have a headquarters at the Pentagon, which exists under this Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, and his broad staff. And that staff is designed to make sure that our forces have the policy, have the resources, and have the guidance they need to be able to fulfill the missions they've been given. Underneath that organizational structure, and I'll move over to the right-hand side of this chart, are 3 field commands, Space Force field commands. If you're familiar with the Air Force structure, those are considered major commands, like Air Combat Command or Air Force Material Command. Might be familiar with that or not, but our 3 field commands, we have 3 field commands that are organized to be able around our missions. We have Space Operations Command, or SPOC. We have Space Training and Readiness Command, or STARCOM. And then we have Space Systems Command, or SSC. SPOC is comprised of our deltas, space mission deltas 2 through 9. And those deltas are fundamentally designed to organize forces, train forces, and ensure that those forces have the equipment they need, and the sustainment they need to be able to accomplish our operational missions, space superiority and whatnot, as I've kind of mentioned before, missile warning, electromagnetic warfare, etc. STARCOM, and that STARCOM is the command on the right with the light blue border, is our Space Training and Readiness Command. Those guardians are primarily focused on ensuring that the operators in SPOC have the training they need, are given the education they need to be experts at their missions. And so our range organizations, our basic military training, BMT, considered boot camp, our organized under STARCOM. Our weapons school, responsible for developing the way that we fight and helping inform and educate the next generation of warfighters, is also at STARCOM. And then lastly, SSC, Space Systems Command, with the yellow border there that you see, they're the ones that acquire our systems. Once a force has been designed, once we've identified the capabilities we need, SSC is filled with experts, guardians, who are there to help ensure that we have the capabilities that our operators at the end of the day ultimately need. And I think I'm getting a couple questions coming in here, so I'm gonna pause for a minute. I'm getting a couple texts, and I apologize if I misread those, but let me make sure I'm not missing anything in my text here. So great points, and this is the classic challenge. A lot of good technical words like battle management, defend, control, warfare. So yeah, go ahead.
And they don't know what the question is.
Oh yeah, I'm about to lead to that question. Thank you, dear. So with all those words being thrown out, all the things that I'm talking about, I'll pause here and just say the basic question is, what does a war in space look like? With all that said, with all these neat functions and missions, all that, what does it look like? Great question. Let me preface my answer by making one statement, one caveat. It's actually a good thing, but it also makes our job of establishing the service, gives us a unique challenge. And that caveat is we've actually never fought a war in space. So much of the things we're talking about are largely theoretical. Now we have some small examples, one-off examples of having experienced some of these missions in previous campaigns over history, but we've actually never had to fight and contest the domain, which is pretty unique, especially establishing a service before we've actually had battlefield experience. But in some basic concepts that you can consider when you think of a war in space. And I don't have a chart for this, but I think the visualization will make sense as I walk you through it. And a basic architecture for a satellite, for a space architecture, consists of 3 different segments. The first segment, very easy. Everybody can get that immediately. That's the satellite itself. The spacecraft in orbit is the primary segment that everybody thinks about when they think of a space architecture. All good. The second segment to think about, though, is the ground network. You consider the antennas that we use to send signals up to the spacecraft and also to receive information from the spacecraft. Our ground networks that we use from a cyber standpoint, the fiber optic, literally the fiber optic cables that are connecting those ground networks to one another. So you have the space segment with the satellite, you have a ground segment with our various control nodes, if you will, for those spacecraft. But the third segment is the radio frequency spectrum, RF energy, if you will, that connects, essentially is the tether between the ground network and the spacecraft themselves. That's the data link that connects the two of them. So that's the third segment. So we refer to those simply as the space, the ground, and the link segments. So when you talk about warfare in, from, and to space, it largely centers around defending those 3 segments and, if necessary, attacking an adversary's space architecture across those 3 segments. I have to ensure that my space segment is accessible, that my spacecraft is safe and secure from any attack in space itself in the domain. But I also have to make sure that my ground segment is secure from any cyber attacks or any other physical attacks that could be made against our ground nodes. And then lastly, I have to ensure that my radio frequency spectrum, the ones and zeros, the data that's being transmitted across thousands of miles, is also secure and is not being jammed or spoofed. So I have to defend and ensure that all of those are accessible at all times. Conversely, if I wanted to deny an adversary use of space, I will look to target one or a combination of the 3 segments. I'd look to target the space segment, the adversary satellite, its ground network, and or its radio frequency spectrum that's connecting their satellites to the ground. So in a broad sense, if you think about warfare in and from and to space, it largely is summarized in the three segments of a space architecture: the ground, the link, and the space. We have to defend all three, and we need to be able to attack or deny in one or a combination of those three. So hopefully that helps give you a visualization or a concept of what warfare in space and through space can look like. And again, your guardians are training across those concepts, their fielding capabilities across those, and we continue to do so. Okay, cognizant of time here for you. It is 8:30 now, but I think I've hit everything I like to do here on the Space Force organization. Amy, I think we can go to the next chart. We're going to go to the next one here as well. Don't worry about that. All right, here's a good chart and a good thing to consider as we support our guardians and we try to understand what we do, where we're located, and how we also rely on the Air Force for some of the fundamental support that we need to accomplish our mission. So if you recall on the Space Force disciplines that I laid out, orbital warfare, engineering and acquisitions, launch, cyber, et cetera, what you won't see in that list of 7 disciplines are things like civil engineering, security forces, other forms of base communications, IT, if you will, information technology, medical personnel, lawyers, et cetera. And that was by design. The Space Force was established in 2019 as a lean, small, operationally focused service. And even in law, in the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, it specifically directed the Air Force, the Department of the Air Force, to support the Space Force in those functions that we didn't have any organic capabilities. And so, as many of you know, we are globally distributed. We have several Space Force bases, and we have distributed operations across the globe. And I have our German Shepherd here that's coming to say hey, so hopefully she doesn't get too much into the picture. But we have a globally distributed operations and guardians fulfilling the mission day to day. But we have a very strong and close relationship with the Air Force. In fact, Air Force Materiel Command, AFMC, which is based out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, is the primary major command in the Air Force that is designed and directed, maybe not designed, but certainly directed to help the Space Force in our capabilities. And so one of the interesting things to this, the fact that we do what we call employed in place operations, and we're not necessarily unique. We're not the only service that does employed in place operations. That is, we don't have to deploy to a combat zone like the other services do with our forces to execute locally. We can execute around the globe from essentially our home stations. So we call that employed in place. The fact that we do that, and the majority of our forces are like that, really puts an extra burden, if you will, an extra set of responsibilities on the Air Force to ensure that Space Force, that our guardians have the support they need throughout the spectrum of conflict, whether it's in peacetime all the way through the heightened levels of war. And so what's interesting, and I'll put this little piece of information in your minds as you work with the airmen and you interact with the airmen in support of our guardians, is should we get into a combat scenario or some scenario that requires the Air Force to deploy its forces, many of those airmen who are doing those base support functions may have to deploy in support of Air Force mission requirements. And that could cause a challenge, a difficult challenge back home in our employed in place forces to ensure that they have the support that they need to continue to operate in conflict. In fact, that challenge is being addressed at the highest levels. The Secretary of the Air Force, General Saltzman, and General Alden as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force are certainly involved and very much interested in ensuring that that support remains consistent for us in times of conflict. So if we go to the next chart, I think that starts to get us into the size in terms of numbers. How big is the Space Force really when all is said and done? So just as a reference point, you see a chart here, a table with a bunch of numbers. and kind of a summary here. Total guardians, if you consider officers, enlisted, and civilians, right now is roughly 14,000. And you can see we're about 50-50 between officers and enlisted. If you talk uniform personnel size, and then civilians are a little bit higher. So about a third of the force is officers, enlisted, and civilians overall. For context, the next smallest service is the U.S. Marine Corps, and they clock in at about 180,000 personnel, and the U.S. Air Force sits at about 330,000. But again, the unique aspect of our mission, being employed in place, and the ability to command and control, or to be able to connect with multiple satellites from a single terminal, also allows our manpower footprint to be much smaller than the other services, while still packing a punch, really packing way above our weight, punching well above our weight in terms of what we deliver to the force. So we don't have to be as big, nearly as big as the other services, to require an extensive amount of manpower and personnel to forward deploy and do their mission. So there's a general sense of our size, 14,000. Maybe to get ahead of a potential question there, if you're wondering, I wouldn't see that number being static. As the Space Force continues to grow and establish itself, I fully expect those numbers to increase over time. How much? I don't know. I don't have a good sense of that necessarily, other than growth will be inevitable to some level. And we'll just have to continue to justify that and explain to Congress, who would be responsible for supporting that, why. But I fully expect that we will have more guardians in the future, and that will be continued growth. Just for the sake of time here too, and I do have a couple more charts, but I do want to at least close for the time being and let you have some of your breakout times, opportunities for that. With two talking points that General Saltzman continually makes, and I think it's important for our spouses to understand this as well. This is something that we're talking about in the Pentagon really on a daily basis. And I'd summarize it in this way. One, that space superiority is essential. It is critical to our national security and what I would say joint force success. In other words, the success of our military forces as they execute their missions in our nation's defense. We have to have space superiority. What you might hear, that sometimes space superiority may not necessarily win a war, but if we don't have it, it could very well be a deciding factor in our success in being able to prosecute that war and whether or not we can achieve it. So space superiority is critical to national security and to joint force success. So that's point number one. And then point number two, and this is important for you to know as well, that the Space Force is still establishing itself. We haven't fully come to our ability to accomplish all the missions that's been given to us. If you think about our history, our recent history and our origins, we were extracted or pulled from the former Air Force Space Command out of the Air Force, a major command. And then that major command was expected to fulfill all of the basic functions and the broad functions of a military service, which is substantial. General Saltzman, you might hear him use this analogy often, that establishing the Space Force is very much like transforming the Merchant Marines, which is really exists to provide support in the maritime domain, to the entire U.S. Navy, which is designed to contest and control the domain and secure it. And that is a massive undertaking. So it would be probably incorrect or premature to think that the Space Force has already fully established itself and is now only modernizing or enhancing, when in fact we're actually still establishing, we're still baselining ourselves, manpower capabilities and whatnot, to be able to fulfill that mission. And I can see that happening for several more years. So as you advocate for your guardians, as you advocate for resources and support, I think if you can continue to remember that space superiority is critical and it's essential for national prosperity and security, and that the Space Force continues to grow and continues to design itself to be able to accomplish its fundamental missions, I think we'll be in a good place. And Heidi, our German Shepherd, concurs and gives her vocal support to that. So I won't take up any more of your time. I appreciate it. Hope this was helpful. And again, always happy to answer questions offline. Probably know my wife, Rachel. Please reach out to her And of course, Amy and Sheila and the team can get that information or those questions to me. Thank you again. Mrs. Saltzman, thanks for spending your time in support with the Guardians. Happy anniversary to you too, and happy anniversary to the Candid Conversations team out here.